Well, folks, we're back with another card review here for the Deadmines mini set. 14 cards to talk about in this video, and a bit of an unusual format here. These were just revealed in one big video on the Hearthstone Twitter, so that's where I'm going to go through and break down each of these cards. You know, we're doing these on the fly, this mini set, so should be all right. So let's kick things off here with Proving Grounds, a new Demon Hunter card. Summons 2 minions from your deck for 6 mana, and then they fight. So a couple interesting things here. Notably, this does not say they fight to the death, so I'm assuming they just attack each other once. Doesn't use the terminology like they attack each other, so a little bit of up in the airness there, but you know, we have other cards where they say they fight to the death. So I don't think they're going to kill each other. I think they'll just hit each other once, which essentially means if you have, 2 minions that aren't going to kill each other when they attack, this could be a really cool way to cheat out some big stuff, kind of like in a recruit style. It will probably damage your big stuff rather notably, but there are still, for instance, some big demons in Demon Hunter that might survive a blow against each other and then cheat out other big effects. Or alternatively, you could have some big Death Rattle style cards where one of the Death Rattles goes off, maybe the other minion survives. Maybe you're happy to just have both Death Rattles go off, proccing some kind of advantageous set of Death Rattles for 6 mana. If there is the interpretation that they both die, that's still, or one would die if they fight to the death. Maybe both still would have some implications, right? You can still stick one pretty cool minion with an effect and maybe proc a Death Rattle along the way. Now, there's a lack of consistency there because you don't know exactly which 2 minions you're going to get from your deck. So some deck building challenges to make this sort of thing work. Still some questions about functionality perhaps as well, but ultimately it still feels like a way to cheat out a lot of stuff, whether that's effects or Death Rattles or just big dudes that are doing other big effects at the end of your turn. You know, it's a big way to cheat things out, kind of in that commencement or recruit style, like either your party back in the day, but 2 minions. So, Death Rattle upsides, big upsides. Death Rattle Demon Hunter has done very successful things. I don't think this card fits perfectly into that mold because, you'd probably want bigger, meatier Death Rattles for that sort of effect. This is also just a little bit more mid to late game at 6 mana, so maybe not a great fit for the more aggressive Death Rattle Demon Hunters. Maybe a better fit for some big Demon Hunters. We haven't really seen that deck carve out a home for itself. All that said, still, I think just a really big effect, and it opens up some interesting doors. So I'm going to give this one 3 stars despite some context concerns. Moving on here to Druid, we've got the Moonlit Guidance, a 2-mana arcane spell. It looks like Guff's still rocking that big living totem thing on his back. It discovers a copy of a card in your deck, and then if you play it this turn, you also get to draw the original. So basically a little bit of cycle here built in with some potential duplication and draw. So essentially just a lot of resources, ways to get extra things you might care about in your deck, but also just get a lot of things. And, in the early game, you're not going to want to curve this on 2 very often because, you may not be able to play that card and draw the original out, which is probably your best case scenario for this card. So, something where you drawing it in the mid to late game, you have some spare mana, you hit a Solar Eclipse or a Lightning Bloom or just something cool, and you get a couple extra copies of that, which maybe makes your deck go a lot further or gives you, a much swingier turn or higher impact play. But the idea of copying something specific and duplicating, a resource you really care about seems fairly valuable to me, and this has a low overhead in a lot of ways at 2 mana, and I think Druid is often favorable for these sorts of cheap card draw and shenanigan and cycle sorts of tools. So it wouldn't shock me at all if some Druid deck is able to utilize this in a spell/cycle package as they have often done. So to me, this feels like a 4-star card. So next up here is the JerryRig Carpenter, a 2-mana 2/1 pirate for Druid. Battlecry, draw a choose 1 spell and then split it. So this is a really cool effect. Basically, giving you extra value out of a given choose 1 card because you kind of are guaranteed to get both sides of that, which is great because you have both flexibility, but also just the extra value from having both sides of it accessible to you. So that's pretty cool as far as choose 1 spells are concerned. It's one of those where there's nothing that's like really jumping out at me as amazing, but there's always been solid choose 1 options that exist in Druid. So on that same side, like, yeah, this is a cool value card, you know, but it's not a great body. So, you know, it's one of those, like, just kind of throw it away early. That's fine. Build for later. But is the payoff really notable enough, right? Is that really game winning or game altering? It just feels like a solid card, which these days in Hearthstone, unfortunately, solid cards, I'm just not sure are good enough. So unless there's some really specific interaction with a choose one spell that you need extra versions of both halves, or you're opening up some ridiculous combo because of it, I just don't think this card's like decisive enough in what it does to really offer the advantage that constructed Hearthstone demands these days. All right, next up here's the Doggie Biscuit. 2 mana spell for Hunter. Tradable, give a minion +2/+3. And then after you trade this, you also give a friendly minion rush. So that's cool. This upside on tradable, I like this expanding on tradable. It's been really cool. And this is another nice one. Get a minion down that's kind of needing of rush. Spend 1 mana. It's kind of like playing a broomstick on a single minion, but you're also getting to draw a card in the meantime, thanks to the tradable aspects. So as long as you have that spare mana, it's like a little nice little bonus on a minion. And then if you actually want to play the Doggie Biscuit in and of itself, it's a reasonably good buff for 2 mana, given 2/3 in extra stats. Now, all that said, this is another one of those cards where I don't know if its focus is like directed enough or singular enough to make it really exciting. In other words, you know, it's kind of this conglomeration of a bunch of reasonably okay effects, but sometimes those kinds of cards, despite being a jack of all trades, don't really fit into decks really nicely. And as I start mapping out where the context for this card could be, I'm having trouble envisioning it, right? Like, what deck is so needing of both card draw and this kind of in a pinch rush? Like, again, that's fine, but most decks are really driving towards some kind of specific win condition or game plan. So this one's not really all that aggressive, for instance. I don't really see it enabling any combos or anything. This feels like the kind of card that would be great in an arena setting and kind of a vintage Hearthstone world where stats on board and just a quick trade with rush are super relevant. But beyond that, you know, decks that are really refined and driven may not be able to make an excuse for this one. Now, tradable is great. It's very flexible. It can give cards a nice bonus. So I certainly don't want to scoff at the Doggie Biscuit's chances here. I still think it's a reasonable 3-star card because of that jack of all trades nature. It's just one of those where it's like, it's not going to be the fundamental piece of any puzzle. It's probably going to be card like 26 through 30 in any given deck where it's like, yeah, okay, a Doggie Biscuit's fine, but I don't think it's really going to drive anything in the meta at a significant level. All right, next up here, we've got the Deep Water Evoker for Mage, a pirate, 4 mana, 3/4, but understated. Battlecry draws you a spell, and then that gains armor equal to its cost as well. So a little bit of life gain on your hero here on top of some spell tutoring. And I love spell tutoring. In Mage right now, you know, they just draw so many cards that spell tutors aren't necessary unless you're building something weird. We've kind of done some stuff like that, like, you know, draw your Cthulhu pieces really quickly, and Deepwater Evoker would definitely help you do that, along with some of the Dungeoneers and such we've seen before. There's a few different spell tutors now in Mage, and I definitely like this upside. Like, if you draw a nice big spell, even a Cthulhu spell, for instance, 5 mana armor gain is not a bad bonus when you're also getting a nice draw effect out of your deck. So I really like this style of card. Now, as we see Mage today, you know, it doesn't seem like the Deepwater Evoker is going to get there, but we have seen some big spell stuff teased in Mage, so maybe there's a big spell line that exists, and this is helping you find and draw out those big spells, also giving you a bunch of big armor in the meantime, which, of course, helps you stall out games and push towards those mana costs that are demanded for the big spells. So you can see a line coming here together, and because this card does do a few different things well, little speed bump stats, good draw that's very specific, and this armor gain upside, which, you know, we've seen other 4 and 5 mana cards that heal be played, things like Spice Bread Baker, for instance. This feels similar, but with perhaps even more upside. So I don't want to write this card off at all. I think there's a world, even if it's not in Mage today, where this is still a 4-star card. So next up here, we've got Arcane Overflow. This is a reasonably large spell that you could see maybe in some of these bigger Mage decks. It's 5 mana. It's arcane. Deal 8 damage to an enemy minion, and then summon a remnant with stats equal to the excess damage. So, you know, if you've got a 5/5 you need to kill, Arcane Overflow kills that 5/5 and summons you a 3/3. Or maybe you just want to use this on a 1/1 to get a big 7/7 on board, for instance. I think that's pretty cool. Nice little swing card here. It's kind of like when you use an Apex's Blast to hit a minion, right? But on average, I guess maybe the minion's a little smaller if you're Apexing something that's a 5/5 or 5 health or so, right? Usually you're going to end up with a smaller minion than you would with Apex's. Plus, this can't go face compared to a card like Apex's. Now, it doesn't have a condition. There's other upsides potentially there from a deck building, lack of restriction standpoint. That said, I still don't know, this having a very narrow focus, it being fairly expensive, the body on board perhaps not being, super valuable, even if the stats are solid, it's still just a body on board. So, this is a card I think a couple years ago would have been really, really good in Hearthstone. I think the swing alone would have been sufficient. Nowadays in Hearthstone, I'm not sure that's quite enough to make this card worth it. I think the leftover stats just aren't compelling enough. So for me, unfortunately, I think Arcane Overflow is only a 2-star card. It's a lot of fun. I think it'll be cool to play. Feels good. It's one of those like arena cards that would succeed a lot, I'm sure. But I just think not quite strong enough to carve out anything beyond a 2-star score. All right, moving on to the Wealth Redistributor here for Paladin. 5-mana 2/8 Pirate with Taunt. A lot of health behind that taunt. Battlecry, swap the attack of the highest and lowest attack minion. Now, I gotta be honest, I don't know if this Battlecry is going to consider the Wealth Redistributor itself as potentially the lowest attack minion, so could it buff itself? I'm a little twisted up here because, sometimes Battlecries resolve in wacky orders on their own rights, but this is also like within its own battle cry. So I don't know, take your guesses, I guess. Somebody out there who really understands the Hearthstone rule set can probably deduce which this will do, but let's operate on the assumption that it won't swap itself first. So, Paladin's a class that might have a 1/1 lingering around. Your opponent plays a 5/5 and boom, you play the Wealth Redistributor. Your 1/1 becomes a 5/1 and your opponent's 5/5 becomes a 1/5. So it's a big swap there where you kind of, take away the strength of their minions while potentially buffing your own stuff. Maybe you even have something that can attack already chilling on board. So it allows you to take a great trade or just hits for some face damage, whatever it might be. The possibilities start to exist because of Wealth Redistributor. Now, on the other side of things, if this does buff itself, you're basically taking a good swing, like turning something into 2 attack could really diffuse a threat while also making this something that's very punishing to trade into if it becomes, like a 5/8, for instance, on board. That's a pretty meaty stat line. Now, all that said, still, I don't know that it's enough, right? Number one, you have to have the right kinds of minions on board in scenario 1 where this does not exchange itself, so that might require some support. Even if it does exchange itself, at the end of the day, it's not the craziest minion, right? It's a big taunt. Maybe it becomes like a 4/8, a 5/8. That's not bad by any means, right? That's still a suitable minion, and if you're able to hit the right sort of threat, like, yeah, that's a good, valuable swing. I think I'd prefer to often just clear a minion, maybe play something like Rush or just more efficient removal options, or maybe just more efficient threats in many cases. This feels like it could be kind of dancing between the two, which can sometimes be problematic. I also think there's just some scenarios where this is going to feel really awkward, where there's not a good moment. Like maybe it's actually punishing to you because you're actually going to swap things in the wrong direction or in a way that's not favorable. So some fit issues is like, man, I got to have the exact right board state. It's a little bit conditional there. And then even on the best case scenarios, I'm not sure the payoff here is quite strong enough. I think a lot of you are going to like this card because you see the 8 health and the taunt, and that sounds exciting in a pro control Hearthstone world. And I would also like a card like this to be very good. I just have a feeling it's not going to do quite enough, much to my sadness. I would love a card like this to work really well. I hope it does, but unfortunately, I think I'm going to land on 2 stars here for the Wealth Redistributor. All right, so next appears the Righteous Defense. This is a cool card. 3 mana, holy spell. Set a minion's attack and health to 1, and then give the stats it lost to a minion in your hand. So I actually think this, despite being pretty similar to our previous card, is more favorable because basically you don't have this overhead of a minion that may or may not really be all that valuable. You get this effect, which is much more flexible in its mana cost at 3, so easier to slot into turns. And then you also get upside that's a little bit more controlled or on a higher value minion. So on Rush minions, Divine Shield minions, minions that scale with attack. We've seen a few of those. in Paladin, like the lifesteal thing that, you know, has a battle cry that deals damage equal to its health. All the hand buff kind of synergy stuff in Paladin plays really nicely into Righteous Defense. And you also have a more reliable and guaranteed diffusal of your opponent's threats. You know it's going to go to 1/1, it's controlled, it's targeted, so it's not quite as conditional based on board states and scenarios. So I think between those two things, this feels like a much more consistent, higher upside version of the previous card in some ways, right? You get to have a little bit more control and manipulation over how this one is actually executed and impacts the board state. And for that reason, I think this is actually a really cool card. I like this a lot. It's a kind of removal piece that has some huge potential upside on minions in hand. So I think this is a cool 4-star card. All right, next up's the Copycat. This one's pretty wild. 3 mana, 3/4 beast. Good solid stat line. Battle cry, add a copy of the next card your opponent plays to your hand. So you play this down as kind of a future-proofed battle cry here, where suddenly your opponent has a dilemma where they have to maybe change or manipulate their plays in order to not give you something really powerful. They're going to see this. They're going to know that it's an effect, so it's a secret that's not a secret, basically. So they'll have the ability to play around it. Which in many cases will make the Copycat feel kind of bad, right? It's like, oh man, they just played some garbage throwaway thing and I got a copy of some garbage throwaway thing that I don't really need. So the real value here, the upside in this would be the sort of disruption side of it, right? Where it's like, okay, my opponent's going into turn 5. I know they have this really powerful turn 5 play, or, you know, they have like their quest line reward. They're getting ready to play Varden or whatever. And I'm going to play the Copycat, and maybe I'll be able to get a copy and rip their Varden, right? And if I don't, they're going to have to play something that's worse, and I'll slow down their game plan. So creating that friction is where the value, I think, would exist in Copycat. Now, unfortunately, I think the promise of that friction is a lot more enticing than the reality. I think opponents will be pretty easily able to play around this. Most decks are running kind of cheap throwaway cards anyway, because we're just cycling through so many cards and we draw so much these days that having a 1 or 2 mana card spare to just kind of throw into a turn to get rid of the Copycat will not be a huge tax on people. It won't be a burden. So I don't think you'll really ever copy anything all that significant or really mess up your opponent's turns or curves all that much. So to me, I think the Copycat it's probably not going to be good enough. It's super fun. I love the design and the art and everything. It's great. It's a really cool design, just maybe not a super competitive one. So despite the solid stat line and fun design, I think this is still only a 2-star card. All right, next up here we have Parlay, a 1-mana rogue card. And read, swap this card for a card in your opponent's deck. So a way to steal some stuff from your opponent. You can take their awesome crazy win condition or whatever, get their Il'gynoth back in the days of OTK Demon Hunter, still around, I guess. But, you know, disruption potential there. Now, they do get this Parlay, which will, in many cases, be a dead draw for them, particularly if they have a really refined game plan. They don't want anything in your deck. It's not going to help them achieve their combo. So I do think this is a cool way to serve as sort of a thief card and a disruption tool all in one. You might get something awesome back. You might get something that really messes up your opponent. And, you know, at only 1 mana, it's a pretty cheap way to do that. So will this make its way into competitive decks as a way to break up your opponent's combos? I don't know. I don't think the consistency will be quite high enough. Things like Mutanus and such seem to have a higher hit rate, perhaps, despite their overhead cost. I don't think it's quite good enough for that, just because, you know, it's like a 1 in 15, 1 in 20 sometimes to hit something important, even if there's 2 of these. But as a shenanigan card, as a super fun card, as a flex into some thief decks, sure, Parlay could see some play. So I think in good conscience, I still have to give this one 2 stars, but it's like a strong 2. It's almost a 3. If you really like this card, go ahead and tell yourself it's a 3. I think that's quite all right. Moving on here to the Sucker Hook, a 4-mana 3/6 pirate for Shaman. Reads, at the end of your turn, transform your weapon into one that costs 1 more. So evolve Shaman weapons this time around. So this is kind of a neat idea, right? Like if you're on that last durability of your Doom Hammer and the 2 damage isn't really worth all that much, you could play a Sucker Hook and you could kind of refresh and restart your Doom Hammer as a 6-mana weapon instead, and maybe hope to high roll into some awesome 6-mana weapon. I don't even know which ones are out there, but that's the idea. You know, making your weapon bigger and better, or maybe just extending its lifespan by adding some new durability potentially. Now, that said, I actually don't think this card's very good for a couple reasons. Number one, a really delayed benefit, right? Like you get a weapon for later. The stats on this aren't especially exciting or anything, is a 3/6. So you're kind of banking on these future payoffs and sacrificing in the meantime. And I don't actually think the future payoffs are really all that good. Average weapon rolls aren't that exciting. Maybe there's some really specific breakpoint where this finds an opening where there's like one great 5-mana weapon or something and evolving a 4-mana weapon into it's really powerful, etc. But I don't really think that's the case. Even in that Doomhammer example I give, it's like by the time you've attacked with Doomhammer 7 times in Hearthstone, you're usually hoping to win the game by then. You're not hoping to kind of be like, oh, okay, well, now we'll try with a 6-mana weapon. So I just don't think the Sucker Hook's worth running in your deck. It's not worth playing on board. And sometimes you're going to get much worse weapons if you evolve into a higher cost one. So there's just something that doesn't fit your game plan, doesn't have attack, whatever it might be. So all in all, I just don't see how this card makes enough sense. And therefore, it's actually, I think, no, we'll give it 2 stars. I was going to say a 1-star card, but it'll stay at 2. It's not that bad. It's a 2-star card. Next up, here's the Hullbreaker, a 4-mana 4/3 demon for Warlock. Battle Cry and Death Rattle, draw a spell. Your hero takes damage equal to its cost. So, pretty crazy card here with the Hullbreaker. It seems like it fits fairly well into handlock / quest lock decks, combination thereof, because you're filling your hand and you're dealing damage yourself, which can help you advance your quest. Can also keep your hand full for all your handlock payoff synergies as well. So really natural synergistic fit there. Now, for the Death Rattle side of this, often your opponent will be killing it, and you'll be taking the damage on your opponent's turn, which will not advance your quest. And in the case of post Blightborn Tamsin, we've already finished the quest, it will not deal damage to your opponent. So the Death Rattle here is in some ways a liability, of course, but not really, because you're still probably happy to draw a spell. And if your deck's not running a bunch of 8-mana spells, you're probably okay to take that little bit of risk for the damage taken, even if it's outside of your control. And then on occasion, you might still be able to be the one who kills this off, or you might even kill it off yourself with like a Drain Soul in a pinch sort of thing. So yeah, I think this absolutely fits into the game plan. Now, I'm not playing enough Handlock right now to know if this is better than other alternatives, or if, would you run this over like a Backfire, for instance? Would you need both in the deck? Those are the sorts of questions you really have to answer for a card like this one. But I think the fact that it draws 2 cards and has those synergistic fits, you still have to acknowledge a lot of potential here with a Hullbreaker, because you can do a Backfire almost, but while also getting some stats and pressure on board. So I'm going to give the Hullbreaker here 4 stars. All right, next up here's the Blacksmithing Hammer, a 4-mana 5/1 weapon with tradable, and after you trade it, it gains 2 durability, which is pretty nuts, right? A 4-mana 5/3 weapon is a lot of pressure and a lot of damage output. And I think it's pretty cool because Warrior does have some ways to tutor weapons, given, say, like the Pirate quest that draws you a weapon. What you could do is, anytime you get this in the mulligan, you just happily trade it back in on like turn 2 or something, get your pirates rolling, and then you draw some pirates, or you draw your weapon after you've played enough pirates, and this is just a 5/3. And you don't really need to do anything more than that. It's just a 5/3, and that's an awesome, super Arcanite Reaper right off the bat. And you just whack face a few times, you win the game on the back of your pirate pressure. Beyond that, I think this is even kind of cool in a control deck as a finisher. If you're in a control deck and, you just need some cycle, you need some card draw, you toss this in. Anytime you trade it, you're stacking up some durability. Maybe by the end of the game, this has like 5 durability, 7 durability or something, right? And as you're sort of whittling down your opponent, you're suddenly tossing in an extra 5 damage per turn. That gives you the damage to end a game in a control deck that would otherwise maybe lack a game ender. So I think both of those potentials are pretty cool for the Blacksmithing Hammer, and cards that can go face really hard are always cards I like, and tradable offers this flexible upside. So all in all, I like it a lot. I think it's a 4-star card. And then our final card here is the Multicaster, a neutral 4-mana 3/4 pirate with Battlecry. Draw a card for each different spell school you've cast this game. And it's pretty crazy. A lot of potential card draw. Some classes like Mage in particular, I think, could really love this. They very naturally want to run 3 spell schools anyway, and a 4-mana 3/4 that draws 3 cards is really strong. Get a little bit of stat on board, but also just 3 cards drawn for 4 mana. Super, super nice. Will it be better than other mage card draw options? I don't know. They have a lot, but there's other classes too where running a couple, spell schools isn't out of the realm of reality. I think about Druid in particular, right? They have Arcane and Nature, so getting like 4 mana draw 2. It's not as exciting, I guess. I really think 3 is the kind of sweet spot for this one. So I'm trying to think if anybody else really runs 3. It's usually 2 ofs except for Mage. So yeah, I don't know. It's either probably Mage or Bust for the Multicaster. Not that a 4-mana 3/4 draw 2 is bad. It's just another one of those scenarios where it's maybe not good enough. That said, still feels like a flexible card some deck might find a home for here and there, right? It's just like, oh, I need card draw. This is a cool tool I have access to. It's not bad at all. So this feels like very much a 3-star card. There will be decks where it feels very strong, I'm sure, in a world where Mage needs minions or has minions in the future. That sort of thing. But I think that'll still be more rare, and this will feel like an average card on most occasions. So there you go. That wraps it up for our card review. 14 rare cards. We're burning through these mini set cards. So share your thoughts on these. Which ones did you hate? Which ones did you love? Which ones did you think I got wrong? How do you think Wealth Redistributor works? I want to hear all those thoughts and more down in the comments below. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.